in 1 year. So we're going to start out with 10 or 12, and then we'll continue through the years till we get everything covered with those plaques. Tell them a little bit about the history of them. They'll be put on the side of the buildings or in the front of the buildings. They have to be on the buildings. It isn't convenient for the city to have them, when they snowplow necessary, to have them up closer to the street. But anyway, that's a project we're working on. I'm not positive if we'll have any of them up for the 250th on July 4th, but we're trying. Also, we have a little booklet that Jim Davis did years ago. Jim and Mika, he did this years ago, and we're out of booklets. When people come into Evanston, they stop at the Chamber of Commerce of the city or something such, and we give them this little booklet so that they can walk around and see the old buildings in Evanston and read about them in this booklet. So we've redone that, and hopefully those will be done and they're out for print. Our commissioner, Bill Alexander, put it together and has done a beautiful job. Bill isn't here tonight. So I'm going to introduce the commission members. And again, thank you for being here. Mickey. Let's start with Mickey. Mickey Cox. Mickey works for the city. She's our secretary and does a fabulous job. And Mika Madrid, or you, she left. Mika also works for the city. She comes to all our meetings, takes minutes, helps Mickey. I don't know what I'd do without those two, because they've really been a big help to me. Tiffany Sager. Tiffany is the manager out at Bear River State Park. And she's been on our commission since, I think, around 2022. Jared Barnes. Jared. You have to come in here. He says, I'm not coming in now. This is Jared Barnes. Jared is one of the newest members on our commission, and he's doing a great job. We needed some men on our board so that we could use them to lift. And so Jared does a great job. He's the one that put the little board thing together out there, and the gun. He made all the arrangements for the gun. We want you to know that that gun's available. There's tickets that you can buy for that gun. We're going to run that through November at Santa's Workshop. We'll be picking Tiffany will tell you a little more about this, but I just wanted to hit on it while Jared was in here. I'm looking for, my name is Joan Nixon, and I've been on the commission. I've been coming to the meetings since about 2017, but I was appointed to the commission in 2021. History is my thing, and I really have enjoyed this. I've learned a lot, and a lot I didn't know. I was born and raised in Evanston, but there's still things I didn't know. Shelley Horn. He needs recognition. Shelley is, Shelley was on this board for years. How many years? 20 years, Shelley.
Well, you can make it 30 or 40.
These are the kind of guys that we loved, that I really have learned a lot from. Him and Jim Davis have done a beautiful job through the years that they were on here, which were many years they had this position. Have I missed anyone off of the
This is just for people that
HPC board, I haven't,
want the
darn
railroad,
it. Debbie
not just
Tucky is
anybody.
another commission member, and she is in Germany. They went there to celebrate their anniversary, so she won't be home until tomorrow. Bill Alexander, I've mentioned, he, I don't know what happened to Bill, but he is on
Kinda
the
worried about
board. His, I can't think if I've missed anyone.
Cookies.
No. But I do want to recognize, down here on the end is Rick Eskelson. Rick Eskelson is the president of RINC. RINC stands for Roundhouse Restoration, Inc. And he's the president of that board. And we work in conjunction. Historical preservation works in conjunction with RINC. They've got the money and we've got the brawn, so we have to work together. I'm going to turn this now over to Tiffany Sager. She's going to tell you about the rest of the program, and thank you again for being here.
Thanks, Jenny. I do have a paper in front of me. I don't have it quite all memorized here. But in celebration of the National Historic Preservation Month, we have some great Evanston history that we don't normally bring out of the box for everyone to see. So we're gonna have some different presentations that we're gonna be doing. Whether you're a local history buff or a visitor traveling through to your next destination, I think you'll find some of these presentations very intriguing. A lot of these things that are going to be presented, or the two things that we have presented, are some of the more unknown things around Evanston. History, no matter where you go, is always present, traversing through our lives, leading us into the future. So without further ado, we have a presentation compiled by Dudley Gardner, who will be given by Mickey Cox. Dudley Gardner is a well-known archaeologist and historian specializing in the Pacific Rim and American West. He holds a Doctor of Philosophy from the University of New Mexico, is Director of Western Anthropological and Archaeological Research, a former Commissioner of the Wyoming State Parks and Cultural Resources, Professor of History and Political Science at the Western Wyoming Community College, and among many other notable accomplishments. Our presentation today will focus on the Union Pacific section camps in Evanston and the surrounding areas. So I will introduce you to Mickey Cox, and she will be doing the presentation for Dudley Gardner, as he's not here today.
So Dudley did a really awesome job putting this together. I was a little jealous of where he's at. He is babysitting his grandchild in New Zealand. So I was kind of hoping I was in New Zealand today. Instead of, I love to be here, but I think New Zealand would be pretty awesome. Anyway, so he gave me a really quick rundown of what he had provided for us today, and I was trying to hurry and take notes, and he said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll send you all the stuff you need." And so I called him about a week ago, and I said, "Where's the stuff I need?" And he said, "Oh, I already gave it to you." I said, "Oh, okay, well." So this is my hurried notes of Dudley's presentation. So he wanted to talk about the section camps, and he starts out with the Fort Ritter Trading Post that was built in 1843. And then, as you guys have been looking at the picture, so any questions of that, I think, can be directed to Tiffany. She knows more about that than me, about any questions about the Fort Ritter, the Wyoming State Park stuff, right?
Yeah, so that building is located at the fort. It is behind the museum that is there at the fort.
Where's it
So
located?
you can actually go and still and see it. It does have, you can kind of see it there on the right-hand side.
Huh?
Behind the fort.
There.
Oh, yeah.
Inside that movement.
think anybody would know that.
They utilized that,
I've been there once.
Thank you. Okay, so next to the next slide. In Union County with Fort Bridger and the Shoshone camps in the Bridger Valley is one of the longest continuously occupied spots in the state. So I'm just gonna go through this. He's got a few slides. In 1868, Union Pacific Railroad built west up Muddy Creek over the Beaver Divide, then down the Bear River to Evanston, where it turned west towards Wasatch, and its descent down Echo, then Beaver Canyon.
It was supposed to be routed through Piedmont. Didn't happen.
Okay, the following is an 1868 map for Utah Territory, places Evanston in Utah Territory. The map also shows the railroad in Evanston. I gotta say, I was a little bummed when we said we were actually part of Utah for a little while. And then Wyoming said, no, we want it back. So I said, oh, hallelujah.
Everything was part of Utah.
Okay, so this is the map. And then the Transcontinental Railroad reached Evanston in December 1868. And it was pretty sparse with the vegetation. You can tell there's not a lot out there. Doesn't look like there's sagebrush, does it?
Oh,
In 1869, Charles R. Savage photographed a Latter-day Saint graver camp in Echo Canyon, Summit County. The Union Pacific Railway hired Brigham Young to organize contractor companies, which employed thousands of Utah laborers to grade through the territory before UP and CP teams laid the tracks. Railroad construction and repair did not end with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. This is the Deep Creek Railroad, Nevada. This was a lot of hard work. And in the snow, that white stuff, that's snow. It is black and white, but it is snow.
I don't know if I said this. I can see it better.
You know that. After the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869, section camps became increasingly important. The size of the permanent camp was dependent on resources available like water or coal and the annual rail maintenance needed in the area. Section camps were designed to ensure the smooth functioning of the railroad. To ensure this, the size of the camp fluctuated. When necessary, tents were used to house seasonal laborers and bunkhouse cars, provided accommodation for work crews. However, over time, every section camp came to include at least a few sturdy wooden buildings. Facilities at these camps often included bunkhouses, cookhouses, blacksmith and mechanic shops, water tanks, coal loading stations, and essential repair workshops. And I also wanted to add a little thing about our superintendent's office. That was a section house. So, people used to live in it, and then they brought it here for the superintendent to work in, to have his office. So this next thing is the miles between each of the section camps, which in 1876 there were a whole bunch of them, and then in 1893 they started to kind of go down. They were starting to take them away.
So Carter was essentially a Carter's Bridger, was it?
Yep. So if you guys ever, and we'll see all of this, but when you follow the big boy, and it names all of these were, yeah, that's what they talked about. Okay. The one that he wants to focus on was the Hampton Section Camp. And so they have a lot of artifacts from the Hampton Section Camp. And then it's got a picture of the railroad construction camp, which I think is really neat to see because it's got, I mean,
I shouldn't feel so bad about taking
everything they're
videos.
trying to do with the railroad. The railroad. The pictures that he has in here are really, really awesome. I don't know where he got them, I'm sure we could ask him when he gets back from New Zealand. Okay, shortly after Union Pacific constructed the railroad north of Fort Bridger at Hampton in 1868, they found out that Muddy Creek, during floods and high water episodes, cut to the railroad bed. To fix the problem, the Union Pacific Railroad decided to reroute the stream and cut channel through bedrock in which Muddy Creek follows through today. This took a lot of workers. So if you notice, the Hampton Channel and then the New Channel, and this was called the 1868 grade. So that's a lot of movement. Section of railroad camps like Hampton provide insights into the smaller Chinese communities. The original railroad grade in 1868, it has a picture of. Shelley, can you tell us what those are? Can't see them? Okay, so this was a new word for me. Bob, can you tell us what those are? No? Okay, he told me they are called Gamby dancers.
What?
A what?
Gammy dancers?
Oh. Yeah. So anyway, I had to write that down because I never heard that before. Yeah, so, but I did not know that that's what that was called. That's what they are called, the Gamby dancers. Okay. Y'all learning something new tonight about that? Okay. So Chinese railroad workers diverted Muddy Creek. So this is a map of what it looked like. And a further up map. And then he has the original river course. And that's how they made that new channel. While they rerouted Muddy Creek, the Chinese lived in semi-subterranean structures. We know a little bit about what they ate due to excavations at Aspen Section Camp and artifacts found on the surface. If you don't know Dudley, he loves artifacts. So he loves to show all of this stuff that we probably think is garbage, or we found in our yard that, you find it and you think, oh, that's just garbage. No, that's artifacts. There were ceramics. He's got stove parts and a hole in the top can, which he said that that hole in the top can is like one of the, there's not a lot of pictures of those. That's really old, 1819 to 1890s. So they were pretty excited when they found that. The diversity of artifacts indicate Chinese, European immigrants, and native-born Americans lived here. More artifacts. So that's more with the flowers. I think that's more like English thing. And then we've got some bottles. And then he has the stone foundation at Hampton. So they did set up stone foundations. The railroad workers worked a variety of tasks in section camps. So they all had a job. And this picture is of them unloading the gravel off of the train car. It was a lot of back-breaking work. So this is unloading a ballast or gravel at a section camp. And it's got a bigger picture of that. And then we've got some Chinese workers. They're throwing the gravel off. Some more pictures of them. And then this one's really neat. This is how, theoretically, they were going to plow the track off with the snow. They put shovels in front of the train, and theoretically it was supposed to get the snow off, and it did not. So then they had to throw the guys out to shovel the track off. Okay, he reiterates that, but shoveling snow, especially Aspen, was difficult. And we all know what happens, it all blows in, you gotta shovel it back out. Snow often filled the cut east of Aspen. So that is extremely deep. But that guy just barely seeing his head, that's very deep in there. Photograph has letters on it, but it's hard to read. It states by grade, so we're not exactly sure where it's up. There by grade. It's really hard to see. Okay, so this is another map of where Hampton was by Evanston and in between Rock Springs. So there's Aspen and Hampton. And then right here, this is the section camps. So the big boy, when it comes down, we've got all of these section camps. We got Fraser, we know where that's at, Church Buttes, Hampton, Carter, Bridger, Leroy, Piedmont, you know where Piedmont is, right, Martin? We've got Aspen and Collier, and then we've got Millis. And if anybody knows where Millis is, it's just right out on 150. And then Evanston, and then Wasatch, Castle Rock, and now we're down into Utah. Many immigrants were first recruited to work on the railroad and then in the coal mines at Wyoming in Wyoming Territory between 1869 and 1871. So this next map is the railroad map of Uinta County. So this just shows what the line has passed in 1874. So this is the railroad line. If I'm going too fast, please slow down. Hopefully I'm not. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. Sorry, I forget. I have to swallow the mic. At Aspen and along the railroad line, UPRR built standardized section houses. So that's the map of a section house, and that's kind of what the superintendent's office looks like outside. Peru's section camp was built atop the ridge the Union Pacific Railroad must ascend coming out of the Green River Valley towards the Black Fork Valley. Railroad construction camps were located here first in 1868. And he told me that Peru was first Bryan, and then they renamed it Peru. He doesn't know why, but he gave me that little bit of history. And then this is what it looked like to have the section houses around in a section camp. Sorry, my clicker's working really fast. Okay, so this is Peru. This is what Peru looked like in Wyoming, not the country. And then because the site was occupied so long, it has a rich and diverse artifact assemblage. So they found a lot of stuff there. He loves that place. Kind of like our China Mary Dig. He loves China Mary Dig too. There's Asian motif ceramics, selected artifacts. This one talks about the artifacts in the year of production at Peru Section Camp. So showing the years that more people were there as opposed to less. By looking at the year artifacts were made, we find at the site we can better determine when a section camp was in use. Peru in Sweetwater County was in use on and off again from 1868 to the 1960s. So that was quite a ways. So this is another picture of Peru. And then the overland route. Like I said, he loves Peru. Do we need to go back? Okay, so this one, this is the amount, these are the people, where they're from, that worked at the section camps. So in Peru, we had Ireland, England, Norway, France, Germany, Austria, Sweden, Finland, Canada, the Japanese, Greece, Armenia, and Mexico. So there was quite a diverse population in Peru. He really talked a lot about the Armenians. There were a lot of Armenians here in the Peru section camp. This is a census. I don't expect you guys to see all of those. They all wrote very nicely back then. Or she did, I don't know which. The census person.
Did Peru, didn't have any Chinese at all? Good.
Okay, so then the Peru section camp, these are the names of the families that live there. And a lot of them were the Armenians. There were a lot of Armenians. And a guy from Wyoming, a guy from Colorado, Illinois.
It must have been the younger one, though.
It must have been, yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, 7 months.
Oh,
Sorry.
7 months.
Yes.
yeah, I see it now.
Yep.
They were hard workers.
Yeah. Section of original 1920 census. So that's it.
Super having their people trying to stop it.
This, I believe, is still Peru. Like I said, he loves Peru. Okay, so this next thing is by house. So it's got their family. So down here, George Hayden, he and his wife he and his wife lived there, and 2 kids. Few examples of the makeup of section camps in Sweetwater County. So this is the Wong Center PC. So it looks like to me like they were more sheep herders. There's one railroad.
Do you know about how, or roughly about how many section house would be in one location?
That I don't know. Dudley might know. I know we've got the old timers building was a section house, and then the supermarkets. So, but I don't know.
I just did a quick Google search and want to know more about Peru. There's a G Pacific colon Peru Hill. Peru Hill, there's a 15-minute segment on that.
Oh,
I wonder if it was at Peru Hill, it's like a campus. Even, the way it started was because of the Wasatch Hill. Hill seemed to be relevant to where they needed to service the Indian because of the
yes.
rates.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Do you want to sit here and also here so you can see this better? Huh?
So this
I
is
just
the road
sit there.
access.
You can sit here that way so you see more. That cardboard's kind of in the way.
Next slide is looking at Evanston. Okay, looking at- I guess Evanston's ability to provide crews over a broad region is one reason that Chinatown emerged here.
It's just a
And also, if you listen to his presentation about the Chinese, there was a big war in Rock Springs, so they sent them all to Evanston. Significantly, Evanston had the machine shops and skilled mechanics that could be transported to whichever section of the railroad they were needed. And significantly, section camps helped individuals living in remote areas, especially in Wyoming, have had access to a telegraph and later telephones. And then he told me this little tidbit. He said that
That's a monkey.
in the 1800s, they did have phones in the mines. So I don't know how mines should be that great, but we all know the story with the telegraph and then later telephones. So that's pretty cool. And you could also, as the Chinese did, have goods shipped from Evanston or from all over the world to your section camp. So that's like the historical Amazon. I'm just trying to add a little humor. Okay, and that's all we have from Dudley. So that's the end of our presentation. So if you have any questions for Dudley, I would be more than happy to get there for you. Get his,
What is that white stuff?
he is presenting again for the brown bag. Yeah, sure.
My treasurer's like, wait a minute, what the hell's that?
I wanted to tell you that I went to work for the Union Pacific Railroad in 1953. And I started as a telegrapher in Rawlins, Wyoming. I worked every depot between Rawlins and Ogden. And there were not that many of them. There was Rawlins, Wamsutter, Bitter Creek, Rock Springs, Green River, Granger, Carter, Altamont, Evanston, Wasatch, Morgan Echo, and Ogden.
Oh.
And I worked in almost all of those depots at one point in time or another. And I can tell you that there was not much in a lot of these locations. At Wamsutter, for instance, I think there was one general store, and I think they wanted to put gas there. I never owned a car in those years, so I had to travel between the depots by either riding the steam engines, and it was up to the train dispatcher to either allow me to ride the steam engine or to put me on the caboose. And so I have many, many fond memories of those days, but unfortunately, when you get to be 90 years old, your memories begin to fade, and you're not sure whether you remember it or you're just making up a hell of a good story.
Oh yeah, that's Denver. These cookies remind me of.
All right, next I want to introduce Margaret Lester. She has been a resident of Evanston for about 45 years. She comes from the neighboring town of Colville, Utah. She has spent quite a bit of time here. She is considered a local historian. She has written a book, so she's an accomplished author. It's From Rag to Riches, A History of Hilliard and Bear River. She was also on the Evanston Historic Preservation Commission for several years. We commend her for her hard work and dedication to the projects she headed and was able to accomplish during her time on the board. She is going to be doing a presentation. She's going to be talking about the Hilliard Station and a lot of the history of Hilliard. So if you would like to come up, Margaret?
God. Please get rid of that. She's trying to get people in this.
A lot of your kids might know her too. She used to drive school bus for You want a county district too? Oh, yeah, or grandkids.
Their kids are grandkids? Kids might know from school bus. Oh.
When she said, would I like to come up, I was kind of hesitant about that. But Joni called and asked me if I would come and do this, and she said something about because I was a historian. At first I took that for a compliment, but the more I thought about it, I thought it's because I'm old. Historians are old, aren't they, Shelley? Yeah. I worked with Shelley and loved him to death. We had awesome times on Preservation Commission. Thank you for those great memories. And I thought we probably even made some history. Maybe. So this is worked very good for me. So maybe I'll just start the whole thing. So I was asked to talk about the Hilliard area and agriculture aspect, but I can't talk about the agriculture aspect without talking about the other history of Hilliard. You can tell I'm from old school because I don't have all this on the screen, but and if you afterwards come up and look at these are kilns at Hilliard and kilns and flumes at Hilliard, which we're going to talk about.
They can assume it with that gate if I get people on here. You can walk in there.
This is the brand that we use on our ranch. Every time we talk about this lady, I get really emotional. Our family has lived on the same ranch for over 100 years, and we now have seven generations that have lived on the ranch. And this is my husband's grandfather and grandmother, who are some of the early settlers at Hilliard, and we can briefly talk about them. I don't want to be prejudiced, but I know more about them than most families there. So anyway, they are not only important to our family history, but they are very important to the history at Hilliard because Ren's grandpa did lots and lots and lots of things to make Hilliard a better community. But we're not going to go into all that, just some. So first of all, I'd like to tell you for this presentation I've used a lot of the information from this book, Rags to Riches, and I'm so very thankful for all those people who contributed to this book. It's the older it gets, the better it is. And I have special consent or permission to use the article in this book written by Thomas Straka. Is that right? He's professor emeritus at Clemson University, and he had an assignment to do a project about the kilns in southwest Wyoming, and he wrote an article in this. And Cindy and I got to meet him, which was an awesome experience. And his photographer, Donald Payne, and he was an awesome photographer. So I contacted him and asked him if I could share some of his information from this book, and he said, certainly. So, but I had to acknowledge, those were the conditions, need to acknowledge him. If you have the opportunity to read this, the articles in here, they are awesome. So, I'll go ahead now with what I have prepared for you, and this is kind of in the way you can see it, but I'm not sure if you're aware that the events that have happened in this little southwest corner of Wyoming called Uinta County has changed the events in the whole world. Did you realize that? They have made a difference to the things that have happened in the whole world. Shelley's nodding his head, so he probably knows. So we're going to talk about a few of those things and why. So, first of all, and I apologize for having to read this. If we were just having a conversation, I could probably tell you, but because I'm not just having a one-on-one, I have to read. So thousands of people left their footprints as they traveled to the southwest corner of Wyoming. The first that we know about were the eastern Shoshone Native Americans. About 1805, they lived in the Rocky Mountains in Wyoming, the Great Basin of Utah, and southern Idaho. Led by Chief Washakie, they migrated from Fort Bridger, following their trail through the Piedmont area to the Bear River Valley every year, and camped near the Bear River and cottonwood trees on what later became the John Myers Ranch. Are any of you familiar where the Myers Ranch is or used to be? So as you're headed south out of Evanston, it's where the theater and Aspen Groves and all that is, thousands and thousands and thousands of acres. But as you cross the Bear River, the first crossing out of Evanston is where their main ranch was located first. About 150,000 pioneers traveled through southwest Wyoming between 1846 and 1869. Among those were about 70,000 Mormon pioneers. After stopping at Fort Bridger for supplies, they traveled the trail through the area we know as Piedmont. On the 12th of July, 1847, they passed through the valley that is known as Hilliard and onto the Salt Lake Valley. Later, thousands of gold seekers also traveled the same trail headed for California. The overland stagecoaches and freight wagons followed. These trails influenced the building of the future railroads, telegraph lines, highways, and even the fiber optic line. Did you know that? Fiber optic line follows that trail. It goes right past our house. One of those Mormon pioneers was John W. Myers. In 1855, he joined a wagon train headed by Captain Oliver Peters. When they passed through the Bear River Valley, he fell in love with the area and knew that it would be a great place for a ranch. He reached the Salt Lake Valley in July of 1855. In 1857, he moved back to the Bear River Valley. He built a home from adobe and a corral for his ponies to keep them safe from the Indians, and bought a few cattle. He was the first to settle in the area. From 1860 to 1861, the Pony Express thundered through, stirring up the dust on the same established immigrant trail, delivering mail from Missouri to California, riding the fastest, strongest horses. A rider would travel 75 to 100 miles a day. Can you imagine that? They would switch to fresh horses at relay stations every 10 to 15 miles. Trading riders, they rode 24 hours a day, 1,900 miles through 8 states, including Wyoming, through rain, snow, sleet, or hail, and Indian attacks in just 10 days. The sound of blasting and digging and driving of steel for the Transcontinental Railroad could be heard for miles. The Pacific Railroad, as it was originally known, was the 1,911-mile railroad line built between 1863 and 1869. It connected the existing U.S. Railroad at Council Bluffs, Iowa, and the Pacific Coast at San Francisco Bay, California. Once again, the railroad followed much of the trail through southwest Wyoming, established by the Shoshone Indians. Over 350,000 people used the railroad for travel in the first 5 years of operation. It facilitated the settlement of the American West and allowed for faster transportation of goods. The journey from New York to San Francisco took just 7 days instead of months by horse-drawn transportation. The United States government financed the building of the railroad with government loans and land grants through the Railroad Act of 1862. This created a race between the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific Railroads to see who could lay the most track and route to finishing point that was later established as Promontory Summit in the Utah Territory. Workers faced treacherous terrain, harsh weather, and dangerous conditions. Thousands of workers died during the construction. It also increased the conflict with the Native Americans. The Central Pacific constructed 690 miles of track from Sacramento to Promontory Summit, and the Union Pacific constructed 1,085 miles of track from Council Bluffs to Promontory Summit. Chief Engineer Major Grenville Dodge contracted with Brigham Young about 2,000 men and boys that were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to build the railroad from Evanston, Wyoming to Promontory Summit through Echo Weaver Canyons. These laborers could build more track better and faster because they didn't get drunk and get involved in fighting like the other laborers. In 1868, the railroad reached Evanston, Wyoming. In 1871, Evanston was a significant machine shop town. Because Thomas Durant, vice president of the Union Pacific Railroad, held back the wages for the railroad laborers on his way to the driving of the Golden Spike at Promontory Summit, the Union Pacific train carrying him was held back at Piedmont, Wyoming. Do you guys know that story? It's amazing. It is amazing.
Of course.
So
Glorifying
I have
religion.
to insert this little experience I have. I have a cousin, Thomas DeCento, or David DeCento, who has written a historical fiction about our family, It's about his grandfather, but he was a brother of mine. It's a great, but whatever. And it's called Out of the Darkness, and then he wrote another book called Where Eagles Fly Free, and it's about the building of the railroad. And he came to visit me, and he'd never been to Piedmont, and so I said, I'd be glad to take you to Piedmont. So we left about 7 o'clock at night from my house, went over to Piedmont, drove the old grade, went to Piedmont, looked at the kilns and the buildings that were left there, and he's doing this research about the building of the railroad, and he knew about this kidnapping, and he knew it happened in Piedmont. And he started asking me some questions. I said, I don't have the answer to that, but I know someone who does. And he said, who? I said, Wendy Peterson. Well, does she live here? I said, yeah, she lives not very far from here. And he said, would she care if we come to see her? I don't think so. Would her husband shoot us if we come? And I said, don't think so. So we visited with Wendy. And you got to think about this. He's writing this history of the railroad and this whole up with kidnapping and stuff, and he didn't know exactly where it happened. So his book was all ready to go to the printer. And he visited with Wendy and found out about they put that train in the Roundhouse at Piedmont and hid it. And it's an amazing story what happened with all that. But he had to go
There's
back
no
and rewrite
Roundhouse
that
in
chapter in his book to get it all right. And I think that is such an awesome story about Piedmont.
I
And
know
I
this
have in
because I
here
talked to the actual owner that owns
the
Piedmont.
history about Piedmont. We'll save it for a later day, but I already
The
told you
Bryan
lots
family,
of
I
it.
think
But
it's called.
anyway,
Right.
that is just awesome.
There is.
So
He said,
the driving
at
of the
the
Golden
time, the
Spike
railroad,
was
that's why
delayed
Piedmont was
because
built.
he had the
Because the
Golden
railroad was going
Spike.
to go through there.
But they went ahead
They
with
built the
the
town
driving of that as it was planned, but the original gold spike was not driven until the next day.
It was just a bunch of little
So
homestead families.
during the construction of the Union Pacific Railroad, there was a demand for timber for railroad ties, telegraph poles, bridges and other building materials, and charcoal. Western Wyoming, Uinta County was the primary source for lumber.
I think the rail was coming from Green River
So, I just want to ask you,
and go from.
have any of you heard of Hilliard Station
They
before?
found the railroad, University found
You haven't?
the
Okay.
railroad and it bypassed Piedmont going from
Of course, Cindy knows where it
Green
is,
River
but.
straight to Evanston. They figured
So I'm
there
going
was
to
no
tell you
point.
about Hilliard Station, and I don't want to rain on Dudley's parade, but Hilliard Station was not a section. Right, I can't, like you said it was, so I'm going to tell you what it was. So, because of the demand for lumber, William K. Sloan moved from Salt Lake City to Uinta County around 1868. He saw a business opportunity in providing lumber products for the Union Pacific
Never
Railroad.
was.
He constructed a sawmill at the head of Mill Creek above Hilliard Station.
There's a cemetery.
Hilliard Station was located at the junction on what is now County Road 173 and 165. It's often now called Lesterville, and that's where we live. And Cindy lives there. It was not always possible or economical to haul the ties to streams where they could be floated to their destination. Hauling the ties was expensive and slow, so Mr. Sloan conceived the idea of building a flume to float the lumber down to Hilliard Station. He organized the Hilliard Flume and Lumber Company. In 1872, the construction of the flume began and was completed in 1875. The flume was built in a V shape and was about 30 inches wide at the top. It was supported with scaffolding and varied in height according to the terrain. The flume was built a mile at a time from the timber mill at the sawmill near the head of the flume. The lumber used for the construction was floated in the flume to the point of construction. It began at Gold Hill and was completed at Hilliard Station. The
I was fishing a
distance
pond
of
out
the
there.
flume was
He caught,
approximately 30 miles.
told me that there's Joseph,
The water
there's
flowed
fish
about
in there.
50 miles,
Because he meant
15 miles
to
an
be caught
hour.
and
It
released.
took about 2 hours for a
He was
log to travel the distance to
Not very
Hilliard
mad, he wasn't
Station
very kind.
because the cut timber
And that's
was
what-
often
that's-
damaged
he
in the
started telling me
flume.
about my
En
house
route to
started.
Hilliard, the sawmill was moved to
But-
Hilliard Station.
He told me he was
Hilliard
the owner
Station was
of
named
a
after Reuben T. Hilliard, a conductor on the Union Pacific Railroad. It did not come into being as a railroad town, but rather a timber and charcoal town. The expansion of the Union Pacific Railroad into the southwestern Wyoming territory created a huge demand for forest products available from the forested slopes of the Uinta Mountains about 30 miles south of Hilliard. The forest supplied building materials, railroad ties, and telegraph poles. Hilliard Station became an important part of history because of the timber cutting, the flume, sawmills, and charcoal kilns. It was a lumber and charcoal center. The main products produced were railroad ties, fence poles, log lumber, and ordinary firewood or cordwood, which was made into charcoal. About 1877, Hilliard Station was the third or fourth largest shipping point on the railroad. In 1887, the charcoal kilns produced 2 million bushels of charcoal. About 36 charcoal kilns were constructed at Hilliard Station. The kilns were made from rock dug from the hillside across Silver Creek at Hilliard Station. The kilns were lined up in 2 rows. They were both large and small. The kilns were filled with wood through an opening in the top. The heat was regulated by opening or closing the square holes around the bottom of the kiln so the oxygen could be limited and the wood burned slowly to produce charcoal. So I'm sure all of you probably seen the kilns at Piedmont. So the ones at Hilliard were built and used the same way.
Do any of them exist?
The ones at Hilliard? No. There's remnants of some. And, you know, you're welcome to look in this book, and I'll pass it around, where it's marked as the article about the kilns, and it has some pictures in there of the remnants. It won't tell you where they are. Any more about where they are.
They're at the Lespers, aren't
Nope. Not anymore. They used to be. Okay, the wood smoldered for several days. The rows of charcoal kilns looked like smoking, conical shaped beehives. When the process was completed and the charcoal cool enough to handle, the kilns were emptied through a doorway on the opposite side and loaded in wagons pulled by 8 teams of mules. Can you imagine how heavy they must have been to use 8 teams of mules to pull those wagons? The charcoal was loaded in the railroad cars and shipped to the copper smelters in Utah and Colorado. There were also 2 smelters built at Hilliard. Charcoal was a necessity in the early western frontier. It was used for blacksmithing, heating, and cooking for domestic purposes and producing gunpowder. It was also mixed with coke and used for fuel in the locomotives. The sawmill was operated with steam. The building was 2 stories high. The saws buzzed daily. The lumber and charcoal industry flourished. A newspaper dated January 9, 1897 stated the flume's cost was $175,000, 30 charcoal kilns at $25,000, and 1 sawmill at $10,000. At one time, the population at Hilliard Station was around 500 people. So in some of the fields that we own, back of our house, you can still see where the foundations of those houses were and the roads to those houses, which was there more than 100 years ago. During the sheep shearing season, Hilliard Station was a shipping point for thousands of pounds of wool. Shearing corrals were constructed and about 40 shearers were employed and turned out about 100,000 head of shorn sheep. In 1901, the first machine clippers to be used in Wyoming County were used at Hilliard Station. George Snyder and Tom Hayter operated a post office and a store at Hilliard Station. John W. Myers built a hotel there. And later, when Hilliard Station was not in existence anymore, John Myers moved that hotel to his property, and that's where he lived. That was his home. Mr. and Mrs. Odie Marks owned a general store and saloon. Mrs. Marks was the first postmistress at Hilliard Station. Joel Lee and his wife provided a Chinese laundry. They boiled the shirts of the Hilliard workers and applied the flat iron to them. In November of 1899, work began on the Aspen Tunnel. And as Mickey showed in those pictures, all that snow on the tracks and that's why they changed the route of the railroad over through Aspen Tunnel. When the tunnel was completed in 1901, it changed the original course of the railroad from traveling through Hilliard Station. This event called Progress, along with no longer using charcoal for fuel, took away the railroad and charcoal business from Hilliard Station. Hilliard Station was closed in 1900. Even though the flume was gone, the charcoal kilns, the sawmills and smelters were no longer used. There was still a future for the Hilliard area. This area became a ranching community, primarily raising sheep and cattle. Many early members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and others that have been miners in Great Britain came to work in the Wyoming coal mines. After the closures of the mines, because of the explosions, these stalwart, struggling, hardworking pioneers homesteaded and developed the land south of Evanston, known as Hilliard. The valley was called Poverty Flat, not because of the condition of the land, but because of the poverty of the people that settled there. They were hard-working coal miners, but the mining work was only seasonal. Many were widows of the 65 miners killed in the Wyoming No. 5 mine explosion on March 20th of 1895. One of those widows was Frances Hutchison, and she was Rand's great-grandmother. Her husband Samuel, along with 2 brothers, James and Thomas, were killed in the explosion. She was the mother of 6 children. The youngest was 4 years old. So Esther Lester in this picture was her daughter, one of her daughters. They worked hard to build homes for their families and establish their homesteads so it could support them. They applied to the state of Wyoming for the water rights allocated to them. As soon as water rights were registered in the territory of Wyoming, John Myers filed for his water rights in the Bear River. It is the oldest water right in the state of Wyoming. After receiving the water certificates, the early settlers of Hilliard built the Bear Canal, Hilliard West Side, and East Fork canals. The money to build them didn't come from government grants. The ranchers paid for the expense of the construction themselves. Each canal's origin comes from the Bear River drainage. So I think this is a neat fact, and you're probably all aware of it anyway. Maybe I'm just really slow learner, but most of the water that fills the Great Salt Lake comes from the Uinta Mountains. Did you know that? Isn't that awesome? But don't tell Governor Cox. I'm sure he already knows.
Margaret,
Yes.
much of the water that produces vegetables in Arizona and the whole valley.
Okay, Salt Lake is this water from where?
Uinta Mountains.
They're what draining.
You know what, mountains don't go out to Salt Lake. You know the mountains are south of here.
Yeah, in the rivers.
She's
Yeah.
shit.
This year, our snowpack this year is going to be so impactful for the rest of a lot of the Western United States.
If any water supply is Great Salt Lake, I think it comes more from Bear Lake.
That's fairly good as well.
Bear Lake gets water from Bear River.
Where's Bear River get its water?
Sulphur Creek.
Ours
Where's
is
Bear
great.
get its water?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Uinta Mountain.
I have no
And
idea.
as we're talking about this agriculture, and I've lived on a ranch all my life, and so agriculture is very important to me, and it's very important to those people who work in agriculture, but I want you to remember that when they're taking all the land that produces grass
Salt Lake should be getting its water
away,
from
because
Echo
what are you
Reservoir.
going to eat?
Yeah, 'cause Echo Reservoir.
And this is the
It's right there in
pinch.
Echo Canyon.
The
Echo
cattle
Reservoir's got the dam.
population is
That dam,
less
the water flows down that dam.
now
into
that
a
it's
creek,
been in
and that goes
75
down
years.
Ogden Canyon.
So that's why your steaks
That
cost so
goes down
much.
there.
So anyway, back to the story of Hilliard. So James Henry Lester, that's his picture there, financed and built the East Fork Canal. It began at Mill Creek and ran approximately
I guess there's anything
24
wrong with it all
miles to his
this work.
property located where Hilliard Station had once been. The canal was nicknamed the $1 Million Ditch and Harry's Ditch. The irrigation water killed the sagebrush and watered the land. The native grasses began to grow. The same grasses are still growing here today. The cattle and sheep graze in the pastures in the summer and fall. The meadows are harvested around August to be fed to the livestock during the winter months. Not only did they build homes and established ranches, but they built a
You know where
community.
Echo is for.
On July 17, 1898, the Hilliard branch of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was organized. The members met in a one-room log schoolhouse located about 15 miles south of Evanston for worship. Not only were church services held there, but also community events and meetings. A community meeting was held in June of 1908. It was decided that a building should be more centrally located. On June 23, 1917, Henry Lester Sr. and Mary Lester and James Henry and Esther Lester deeded to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints one.
That'll be it for that video.